All right. So diving straight in, yeah, maybe Kyle, you want to tell us a bit about your journey, where it all started with Sloww and everything, and then we can just kind of have a free flowing conversation from there.
Yeah, sounds good. So for me, everything started, gosh, the end of next year will be the 10-year anniversary, my 10-year crisis versary.
Mm.
So for me, this journey didn't really start until I turned 30. So it's kind of there is something stereotypical maybe about that 30-year-old age. Although I'm interested to hear your story because you got an early head start before in your 20s. But for me, it started at 30, and it was like 8 years. I was working in the marketing and advertising industry, and it was about 8 years into my career. And what's funny is, those first 8 years, it was just the typical thing. It was like you get the best job you can, try to get promoted, try to make more money, which led to spending more money. So that whole lifestyle inflation circle of work, make money, spend, repeat was doing that whole thing. And I thought that was just the norm, right? In like Western culture, especially in the US, it's like that's the thing. That's the American dream, which is now, probably more so known as the rat race. But for me, I hadn't questioned a thing. So those first 8 years, just doing it, I didn't love it. I kind of stumbled into the marketing career in general because when I went to college, I thought I was going to go into graphic design, and I was up until like 2 or 3 a.m. in high school doing art projects. And I was like, this isn't probably going to be sustainable. And so I just went into like general business, which stumbled me into marketing. And then I woke up 8 years later and I'm like, how did I ever get into this career in the first place? Which it probably isn't too uncommon for a lot of people. But yeah, so what happened was I think I was on my fourth marketing job, like my fourth company, and I had multiple like jobs within those companies along the way. So I had kind of made my way around the marketing world a little bit, but it wasn't until this last job in my career. And it's funny why it worked out this way because my last job was at a clothing and apparel company. And my job, I think at the time I was like a senior brand manager or something. And my job was to essentially sell people more $40 jeans. Like, how do you get more people to buy, get millions more people to buy these $40 jeans essentially? And it was a well-known brand. The brand's like over 100 years old. Um, but uh, but yeah, so that was my job, and I just remember I just felt like this massive lack of purpose, and like I didn't personally care if a single another person bought another pair of $40 jeans, but it was that lack of purpose combined with my boss when I first started got let go from the company, and the president asked me to do my job and that person's job until they backfilled the role. And that meant 6 months straight. It took them 6 months to fill the role of my new boss. And for those 6 months, I worked 60 to 80 plus hour weeks every single week for 6 plus months straight. I think even after the new person started, I was still working these insane hours. And in order to get like 80 hours in a work week in, that meant the typical like 8 or 9 to 5, plus I would work like 10 p.m. to 2 a.m. like every weeknight after my wife would go to bed, and then some weekend work on top of it. Like that's the only way you can rack up 80 hours in what is otherwise supposed to be a typical 40-hour work week. And when I reflect on it, it was that combo of the purposelessness of not really caring about what I was doing with the burnout of the high hours for a sustained period of time. And that was finally the first thing that broke me because in my prior jobs and roles and stuff, it's not necessarily that I found the work purposeful, but it wasn't enough of a lack of purpose and it wasn't enough burnout for a long enough period of time for it to create that breaking point. And so I'm actually pretty grateful, at this point for what ultimately led to what I call a self-diagnosed existential crisis of starting to ask all the questions about life, or what I thought were the big questions about life. And it really started with a question. I remember this being at our house in Kansas City at the time and just staring. It was like 2 or 3 in the morning, just a typical weeknight of me doing this forever, and staring at the ceiling of our bedroom. And this was probably in October or November of 2015. And my heart was pounding, like my heart was racing. I couldn't fall asleep. And my mind was spinning and starting to ask the questions of like, this can't be what life is about. Like this, like killing myself to work on something that I didn't care about, like, and thinking that I could have, decades more of this in terms of, a career or whatever. I was like, this surely can't be it. Life has to be about more. I'm not sure if I specifically asked any questions like articulating purpose at that time. Like if this isn't, it was probably something, more implicit. Like if this isn't the thing, if I'm now recognizing that this isn't it, then what is it? And starting to move in that direction of questioning. And that led to like I call like a 6 week acute crisis of, I wish I had my Google search history at the time of like all the things I was searching. Because of course at the time I thought I was asking like life's deepest questions, right? But that was just the surface and initial steps into everything of, what is life? What is purpose? I started watching like all these nature documentaries, trying to like, I now reflect on it, like I was trying to reconnect with life. I was essentially like a walking zombie, right? Because I'm showing up day in and day out at this job that I didn't really care about, career that I didn't really care about, that I stumbled into. And I was just trying to figure out like what was next, like how to resolve this crisis for myself. And so searching anything and everything, I created a Google sheet or a Google Doc that I shared with my wife and my family and some friends called How to Have an Existential Crisis. And it was essentially my first like note-taking document. It was like 30 plus pages long of everything that I was searching and learning at the time, of stuff about like humans and humanity and the world and the universe and life. And I was watching all these nature documentaries, like rewatching like Cosmos and Planet Earth. And I now realized I was trying to connect with something deeper that I did not have access to at the time, because I was just essentially like an unconscious walking zombie day in and day out of, trying to resolve this cognitive dissonance in my mind of like, I am in this career, but it's not for me, even with all the, making it on paper with resume and the job titles and the salary and benefits and all that stuff. It just, that wasn't enough. That wasn't fulfilling. So that's what got me started on the journey. And yeah, next year will be the 10-year anniversary of that. But I refer to periods in life now as like pre-crisis and post-crisis, because it's that different in terms of my life before and after. But yeah, I'd love to hear a little bit about your journey. I know I've told you before that during my crisis, I stumbled across your I don't even know if it was your first website, but it was called Refine the Mind at the time. And I found myself there, a handful of times, and I was like, "Who's this Jordan Bates guy? He seems to be or have gone through something that I feel like I've gone through." And I remember even messaging you on Twitter at one point early on, probably in like 2018 or 2019, and saying like, "Hey, you seem like someone who has like is like a few steps ahead of me on the path. Like, what have you learned? Who should I check out?" And things like that. So I'd love to hear a little bit about your journey as well.
Yeah, for sure. Thanks for sharing your story. That was beautiful. And yeah, so for me, I lived a pretty standard Midwestern existence from a small town in Iowa for the first um 18 years of my life. And then yeah, it was really when I was 19 at University of Nebraska that um well, first I had been smoking a fair amount of cannabis, which I think was kind of pre-paving the way for something. I do consider cannabis a psychedelic, and so the cannabis was reconnecting me to this like childlike wonder and this more raw, immediate way of noticing the the beauty of nature, you could say. But then it was really when I um, took mushrooms for the first time that I really had like my first, I would say, full on, really profound awakening experience. My friend and I were just walking around my college campus, and I just remember seeing like auras of rippling energy around the trees, and everything was just kind of wavy and breathing, and it was just like this invisible film had been removed from my senses, and suddenly I was melting into a living mystery. I was like communing with the living mystery of life all around me, and life seemed much more vibrant, much more mysterious and alive. And that was really um that was definitely a watershed moment on my path, which led to me experimenting with other psychedelics, and which kind of continued to occasion different types of awakenings and openings. And then I met some kind of funky, wavy friends at university who started opening my mind. And I started reading a bunch of dangerous books. I was an English lit major. And so definitely Friedrich Nietzsche, I think, had the biggest impact on me around that time, which is why he was the figurehead of Refine the Mind for a lot of years back when that was my site.
I do remember
Um,
that logo. Yeah, the Nietzsche
mhm.
logo.
Yeah, Nietzsche with the headphones. Yeah,
Yep.
I still use that image. Like that's like my profile picture on Reddit. I still have like t-shirts with that image on it because it's
Oh,
really
nice.
it's dear to my heart because Nietzsche really hit me like a heat-seeking missile or like a thunderbolt around that time. I mean, the psychedelics were already opening me up, but then Nietzsche came in and just like presented me with this framework. Actually, his framework in the book "Thus Spoke Zarathustra." I don't know if you're familiar with it. The
Hmm.
camel, the lion, and the child framework. It's like elegantly simple framework, but in short, he basically says the soul starts out as a camel and lives a life of duty, kind of unquestioning bondage to one's culture, and just kind of bears a burden for some period of time in life. And then at some point, the soul becomes a lion and enters into the loneliest desert. And in the loneliest desert, the lion must face the dragon called Thou Shalt. And this dragon has the words Thou Shalt written on every scale. And the lion is needed because his courage and tenacity allows him to deliver the sacred no to the dragon called Thou Shalt in the loneliest desert. And essentially what that represents is just saying no to all inherited values and all inherited life scripts and all preconceived conditioning and programming, and just saying, no, I'm going to reevaluate everything for myself from first principles. And yeah, Nietzsche called that the revaluation of values or something like that. So the lion embarks on that process, but then the lion ultimately must become a child, Nietzsche said, because the child is needed to deliver the sacred yes to the game of life and become this self-propelled wheel of creativity and spontaneity, free expression, and just essentially be a liberated spirit. And for Nietzsche, that would look different for every being. Like he had this kind of ideal of the Ubermensch, the overman,
Mm.
and it was kind of, yeah, this being who had truly become what they were. Become what you are was his maxim that actually I have tattooed on my shoulder right here.
Oh,
Back
nice.
in 2017, got those words tattooed. And yeah, so Nietzsche hit me like that. And the combination of the psychedelics and meeting different people, Nietzsche, as well as like Emerson and Thoreau and Kerouac and Ginsberg and some of these guys, the British romantics, a lot of these authors, it all just led to this, I would say, reactivation of curiosity for one, like reclaiming an identity as a student of life that I had lost at some point. I feel like all children are students of life, but at some point
Hmm.
that gets buried and we're just told that the answers have already been found out. The answers are in the back of the textbook. You just have to memorize them and regurgitate them at the proper times and jump through all these hoops. So I just reclaimed that identity of curious student of life and realized the mystery is alive and well. I need to find my own answers. And Nietzsche had kind of given me this directive of like, become what you truly are. And something about that just resonated so deeply with me. And I was like, yeah, that's what I want to do. I want to be me. I want to find out what and who I really am. And I want to be that guy. And that was really, yeah, that was a big catalyst. Then I spent a month traveling abroad in Spain as well, like near the end of college. And that was another big opening where I was like, oh my God, traveling abroad is incredible. This is like completely stepping out of the matrix of my cultural operating system that I grew up with. And now I can see so many new things about my culture and about the world. And there's all this novelty flooding in. And I'm drinking this wine in Spain and this feels amazing. And so that set me on the path of asking, how can I become a digital nomad? Because I had already started to learn about digital nomadism. I was even already blogging at that point. I had a travel blog in Spain. And so that really catalyzed that process of asking, like, how could I just be free to travel the world and basically do whatever I want and just like discover my own creative process and explore myself. And that led me to teach English in South Korea, found out about teaching English abroad. So that was kind of my first, that was the next major leap for me, going from Nebraska to South Korea. And that just spiraled into a lot of other stuff. And basically, for the last decade, I lived a largely nomadic lifestyle. I found a way after teaching English. Not long after that, I found a way to start earning a living as an online creator, just writing about philosophy and spirituality, starting to sell courses and then eventually retreats and coaching and stuff like that. And yeah, there's more to the journey. I won't go into too much more detail, but just to say, in later years, then I encountered ayahuasca and bufo, more powerful psychedelics, as well as, which kind of then led me into non-duality, which I would say is sort of like hardcore spirituality, you could call it. And so
Yeah.
that led me down the very hardcore and more radical spiritual path that I would say I've been on for a few years now. And that's been crazy. And then fatherhood happened, and that brought me back down to earth after I had been kind of just transcending for a couple of years there. And so yeah, it's been a wild ride. Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. I'm fascinated by just how early of a start that you got and the combination of psychedelics plus Nietzsche. And have you thought about, I'm sure you have, but in terms of why you were able to like say yes to the idea of like become who you are and authentically finding yourself at such a young age where other people might have those same, psychedelic states or experiences or even read some of the same books, but they're interpreting it from a different, mind, and they might just continue with their socialization and conditioning, and it might not have an effect on them, at least initially. It might be something that resurfaces years or even decades down the road. But do you think there was something in terms of like how you're naturally wired or your childhood or something where you were able to not only experience those things but also integrate them in a way that you're like, I'm going to follow this and see where it takes me, where other people can't or seem not to be able to?
That's a really good question. I think it was probably a combination of many factors. But for one, I would say I think the psychedelic journeys actually uh, put me in a place of crisis or something similar to crisis to some extent in terms of how I was relating to society and my culture. I just started to feel very there was a period of time where I really felt like a complete black sheep. I just felt like, what have I stumbled into? No one around me is thinking about these things. No one around me seems to be asking, like, what is this life thing? This is so weird that we're in these, bipedal ape bodies and we're all just strolling around acting like this is normal. And apparently we're just supposed to get a job and work for the next 50 years and that's it. And I was like, what is going, I was really just like shaken to the core and feeling very alien and very strange in Nebraska after some of those journeys. So I think that was a big piece of it, was just that actually I started to feel this intense anxiety around, what am I going to do with my life? How am I going to fit myself into the rat race, into some kind of career? And I just had this very strong feeling at that age that I just can't do it. That's just not for me. I have to find another way. It was like, that's not going to work for me. There was just a deep knowing, like, I'm not going to beat another cog in the machine. It's just not going to work. There was definitely such a yearning. I would say the psychedelics really amplified this. And I think by nature, I'm an INFP, Myers-Briggs. Like, INFPs are very driven already to look for purpose and meaning. So I think the combination of my innate personality type, combined with the psychedelics, I was just extremely hungry for meaning, purpose, deeper truth, the truth of existence, and freedom, like freedom from, because that was the other thing, was there was a recognition that I had been boxed in for years at that point. There was a recognition like, oh, my soul didn't actually like going through the public education system. I didn't like having to sit in a desk 8 hours a day and complete all this busy work. That didn't do much for me. That didn't ignite anything. There was no aliveness there. So once I got a taste of real aliveness and freedom and the other side of the coin through some of these psychedelic journeys and through traveling and through meeting certain people and just reading on the internet and discovering like, oh, there are people who found a way to earn a living just doing what they love and like writing about interesting topics. Like, I feel like I could be someone like that. It just started to snowball from there. It was just like, yeah, I'm not meant for the status quo. So
Yeah, that's amazing because I'm trying to, while you're talking, I'm thinking about like, what was my life? What was I doing at 18 or 19 years old? And it was nowhere close to this path or asking any of these questions or having any sort of awareness whatsoever. If I think about being 18 or 19, I guess it would be like late high school, early college. If it was early college at that point, I was mostly focused on partying and partying in the sense of just drinking a ton and yeah,
well,
and
I
I had
was
my
partying
fair.
too, I will say.
Yeah,
I was also
I
partying. Yeah.
I had my fair share of smoking as well. But for me, I don't know what's up with my genetics or how I'm wired or what. But smoking for me half the time led to a bad high, and I would get like paranoia or it wouldn't lead to necessarily a good experience. But then the other half would be great, you know. But the half where it wasn't great kind of turned me off from it a little bit. But yeah, in my early, late teens, early 20s, it was definitely those. I consider actually those years of college probably my most lost years, aside from my crisis hitting, because I had grown up in like what I realized. I didn't even realize this until my 30s, is that my self-worth was always tied to my work throughout my life. Like that's the common theme throughout my entire life, I feel like. And I don't know where it came from because I feel like I had this fear of like disappointing my parents, but they never said explicitly like you better not disappoint us or anything like that, right? So I don't know where it came from, but that led to that fear of disappointing parents and everything being tied to my self-worth. When I say work, I mean everything in terms of like getting good grades in school, excelling at sports, getting a good job, getting promoted, like that whole deal of all the things that work can encompass throughout your life in different ways, shapes, and forms. My self-worth was always tied to that. So it was like better get straight A's, better excel at sports, better get a good job and that whole thing. And it wasn't until my 30s where I was able to articulate that upon reflection to myself of like, oh, that's been the theme. I've always been had this fear of like disappointing others, like especially my parents, even though no one has said you better not disappoint us. And everything has been tied to my self-worth. And so that's still probably the biggest thing that I think about often is, and that's obviously starting to crumble and dissolve over the years and things like that. But that's probably the biggest thing that I still think about in terms of, things that I either still struggle with or suffer from, which is ego related, right? And self related, the sense of self. But as the sense of self develops, that starts to, that kind of sense of self-worth starts to detach itself from the work that you do and any ways you label yourself or describe yourself or things like that. But yeah, I was not at, if you would have given me Nietzsche at 18 or 19, I would have been like, yeah, okay, maybe I'll read it, never, because I wasn't, that's the thing that people are surprised about too, is like, I didn't read for fun growing up. And the reason for that was because I was like a super slow reader, like physically slow reader, to the point where my worst grades in school were like reading comprehension because I would never finish reading tests on time. And so I always had this perceived weakness with reading of, well, I'm not going to read for fun because apparently I'm not good at it. And I didn't even realize, this is another thing I didn't realize until, decades later, that I am a slow reader in general, but the reason I'm slow is because I'm thorough and I'm methodical and I'm reading things and chewing on sentences and words and trying to fully understand it and grasp what's going on and get like a full holistic understanding of what I'm reading. But no one described to me at the time, when I'm a kid, that's what you're doing. It's like, no, you're not very good at reading, obviously.
Mm-hmm.
So I probably wouldn't even have read Nietzsche if someone would have told me like, you have to read this book, it's going to change your life at 18 or 19. I'm like, nah, I'm going to go to this party instead. So it's just fascinating how, people can get started in different time periods, different stages of life. Like what's going to be that catalyst moment or spark of when something's going to click with you, in terms of, you know, it's going to hit your mind at the right time to be able to actually have some type of perspective transformation or be open, even open to it. So that's pretty interesting to me. But you kind of touched on this a little bit, in terms of like you kind of felt like you were on your own when you were first, like you're a black sheep. Why do you think more people aren't on this journey? And do you think more people will become interested in this and start waking up to some of the stuff in the years to come? And the reason I ask is because one thing I did a couple years ago, all my LinkedIn, I don't really use LinkedIn anymore because I don't have a reason to, but during my marketing career, or a lot of my LinkedIn connections are from my marketing career or from school for the most part. And so what I did a couple years ago was I looked at my 1,500 LinkedIn connections or however many, and I looked at what they're doing now to see if anybody else had left the rat race, quit their marketing career, or switched to a marketing company or job that was more meaningful or purposeful, or just was doing something completely different. And I think I counted only 10 to 15 people out of 1,500 that were doing something different. And this was just a couple years ago. I'm interested to hear your perspective on why, if you get that same sense that there aren't a ton of people, especially maybe around our age, that are interested in this kind of stuff, or if you see that increasing in the coming years.
Yeah, it's a good question. I guess I feel like everyone is on the journey, even if they whether they know it yet or not. It's just like I
Yeah,
see
that's true.
everything as the path and everything as the destination. Even, you know, everybody's already at the finish line and on the path, and they just don't know it yet. So it's just it's a great irony, funny thing about life. But you know, it's very hard to predict whether more people will start to ask these types of questions and get curious about, yeah, what is the deepest truth of life? Who am I? You know, of course, there's like the new age movement, and there's tons of people that feel we're in the midst of a mass awakening, and that a mass awakening is what it's going to take to avert, you know, existential crises, like avert destruction for humanity. Um, and a lot of people think that that's like foretold and that's predestined and it's prophesied and that's going to happen. And I don't really know at this point, honestly. I feel like I was more invested in narratives like that. I kind of go through phases. I feel like if I take psychedelics, I'm more apt to feel that way and feel like, oh my God, like the high frequency energy is entering this realm and we're all being summoned to rise upward. And but I think in my day-to-day life, like I'm not working with intense psychedelics too often at this point. And in my day-to-day life, I'm just more so very focused on immediate experience. That's kind of what is most interesting to me now, is just like, what is experience itself? And I love just like admitting to myself that I don't know what it is, and then just kind of letting it seduce me, letting myself be really entranced by the juiciness and the texture and the richness of immediate experience. And so I find myself honestly oftentimes not thinking too much about like the global issues and everyone everyone who's out there on the journey. I just of course it comes into my field of awareness all the time for different reasons, but I'm just very focused on my family and kind of my sphere of the people that I'm helping and that I'm serving. And then I'm focused on kind of the cutting edge of my practice, which just doesn't have much of anything to do with the world out there. That's just kind of assumed to be in God's hands and kind of taken care of it. It's just like this immediate moment now is what God wants me to pay attention to. That's why I'm right here right now. So yeah, I don't know how to predict it. I don't feel too invested in narratives of mass awakening right now. It seems to me like very often people don't start asking these questions until life gets really hard in some way, until suffering brings them to a point of like everything they had known about life is smashing up against something, and they're just like forced to ask, there must be another way, similar to what happened to you. And I think prior to that, most people just seem very happy to just kind of be in the amusement park of Maya, as Jed McKenna puts it, and just
Yeah.
just enjoy the ride and take things at face value, basically, and say, oh yeah, I'm a human being. This is the earth. This is how things work here. And I don't need to ask, I don't need to go much deeper than that. I'm just gonna, do what I was told to do, and that's that. And that's fine. That's a lot of people's karma in this lifetime and many lifetimes, it seems. But yeah, for whatever reason, some of us get the strange summons that is like, nope, that's not your karma in this lifetime. You're meant to
Yeah.
pull back the veil a little bit. So.
Yeah, the Jed McKenna example reminds me of, I just recently read some more Alan Watts, and he describes it as, a lot of people are playing a really far out game, but it's still God's game. It's still a game of hide and seek and everything else, according to how Watts puts it or whatever. So, yeah, you still got to love the people playing the really far out game. Um, yeah, so I would totally agree with you there. In terms of, because you've been on this journey for so long and it's evolved over the years, how you brand yourself, how you describe yourself has changed over the years. How would you describe yourself at the moment? I saw that you're changing, where you're writing, like the name of your Substack. I think it was called The Art of Becoming Real. Now,
Hmm.
I have seen the
Yeah.
Nietzsche quotes, become who you are. So do you want to share a little bit about that, of kind of how you're feeling about at the moment?
Yeah, good question. I mean, yeah, how I would describe myself, I guess, is just most fundamentally, I'm just me. I'm just Jordan, just JB, and it doesn't feel like any designator above and beyond that. I mean, even that designator, I don't think can really capture what we are, but I just feel like myself and just feel like, yeah, I am what is. I'm just this nameless mystery of life expressing itself as Jordan at this juncture. And at the same time, there's also different roles that I have, or kind of archetypes that I express, that are also meaningful to me. And you know, those would be things like being a father, being a husband, being a writer, being an artist, being a rapper, a beat maker, a mystic, and a space holder, creator of healing spaces and spaces for inquiry and transformation for people. Um, so yeah, that's kind of what comes through on that, and the yeah, in terms of like the recent shift of the name of the Substack and kind of rebranding things on social media, I'm curious to see where that goes myself. It's honestly, it's not a calculated move. It's more like I reach a point. I see this seems to happen every like so often, every year or two at this point, where I just reach a point where the current way that I'm expressing myself online starts to feel stagnant in some way. It just feels like, okay, I've kind of been pigeonholing, because any brand, any way that you express yourself, to some extent, it's a narrowing down. It's like it's pigeonholing, and it's presenting a certain image of what you are, and the image can't really capture what you are. And so for me, when that starts to feel stagnant, there's just like this sense of aliveness that comes up that would be like, well, I don't want this stagnancy. Like what would feel more fun than this? What would feel more alive than this? And there's just a sense of like, just burn it down, and mix it
Yeah.
up and do something that feels more alive. So that's kind of what's going on with that. Honestly, reading um forget his name, Rob. I think Rob's
Oh,
uh
Rob Hardy.
yeah, the
Yeah.
non-coercive marketing, reading his
Yep.
blog in recent days was one of the puzzle pieces that kind of made me realize like that I was feeling stagnant about what my brand had been for a while, or the way I'd kind of been presenting myself. And his piece was a really good permission slip to just admit to myself that I've never been good at adhering to a single niche or staying on brand. I'm a very spontaneous, unpinned downable person. And I think it's very limiting to niche myself in too much. So he kind of gave me permission to just say, yeah, fuck a niche. I'm just I'm just me, and I just want to have another chapter on the internet where I just let myself be me and be free and have fun, and to a great extent that's what I'm always doing. But then I try out different things, and I feel like I'd been trying a somewhat more niched and more like adult kind of style of presenting myself on the internet for a while. And yeah, I just realized like the inner child's very alive for me right now. Like in the men's work that I guide, this month is inner child month. Like every month has a different archetypal theme usually. And so the inner child's very alive, and there's just something coming up right now around trusting the aliveness and it being safe to trust the aliveness and trust that childlike joy and spark. And so that's resulting in what you're seeing online right now, which is just me just being like, I'm gonna have some fun.
Yeah, kind of a follow-up question for that in terms of, do you think entrepreneurs like us struggle by not niching down as much? And I ask this because I had this exact conversation a couple days ago or last week with someone where he asked me the question, like almost that exact same question, where other people are like the insert the blank guy, the note taking
Mhm.
guy, the writing guy, Ryan Holiday, the stoicism guy, Shane Parrish on Farnham Street, the mental models guy. Like everybody has like their thing, like their singular thing. And they might do
Mhm.
other stuff too, but they're known for like one big thing. And then I thought about it for myself and I was like, I don't have a singular thing that I can like, hang my hat on in terms
Mhm.
of what I would insert in the blank. So for me, it was like, and I remember having to go through this decision early on where, Sloww is named Sloww because of slow living, which was
Mhm.
one of the concepts that I had discovered right, like either during or right after my existential crisis. Because like I said, I had just been doing the American dream thing, rat race thing, lifestyle inflation thing, and I had no idea that intentional living was a thing.
Mhm.
So when I discovered that, and that includes things like uh, slow living, simple living, voluntary simplicity, minimalism, digital minimalism, decluttering, financial independence, lifestyle design, like all those concepts I include like under the umbrella of intentional living. I had no idea any of that stuff existed.
Mhm.
Like it was not in my awareness whatsoever that that was a thing in life. So because that hit me, as such a contradiction to how I was living, it was like, oh, maybe I should. One, I saw it as like a possible way out of my career. Like if I could limit my expenses and spending down enough, maybe that's a way I could, have like an on ramp to entrepreneurship. But it was also the flip of how I had been living, like the whole lifestyle inflation thing, getting the bigger house, the nicer car, whatever. It was like an antidote to that.
Mhm.
And so that's why Sloww was named Sloww initially, because I was like, I don't see hardly any information out there about all this intentional living stuff. So maybe I should do something around that. Um, and then I remember the point a year or two later, maybe not even that long later, when I was like, well, now I'm starting to get into like all this other stuff. I'm starting to get into life purpose, starting to get into like knowing thyself psychologically. I don't think I had hit the spirituality stuff yet, but all the other topics were kind of coming into awareness and shifting into those phases. And I remember thinking, like, I have to make a decision. Like, am I going to just try to make the ultimate intentional living website and resource and products around that and just go all in on like that niche? Or am I just going to share whatever I'm finding curious and whatever I continue to inquire about, almost like in real time and share that stuff? And I knew what I was getting into in terms of like, I know I'm going to sacrifice being known for like one thing if I do like the holistic thing. And that's what I've followed in all the years since, is just being the more holistic thing. But I do wonder if that has a business, sacrifice or trade-off of not being able to, put a single label on yourself. So I'd love to hear your thoughts on that in terms of, what you think about that.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a really good question. And yeah, it seems like for both of us, if you were to describe what our niche is, it's just something like holistic life wisdom or holistic life mastery or something like that, which is
Yeah, I call it the art of living, but same thing. Yeah.
yeah. Yeah. And I've struggled with this because especially like when I started trying to get better at business, reading a lot of business books and hiring some business mentors and stuff like this. Like niching, of course, is just like the chorus that you hear sung throughout the hallways of every business expert says, that's the way to increase your business. You need to niche down. You need to choose a niche. You need to become known for one thing. You need to solve a very specific problem or a very specific set of problems for a very specific person, kind of take them from painful problem to joyful solution. And yeah, like I've done some of that at different times. I've integrated some of that at different times with varying levels of success. But generally, and in terms of whether it's like we're missing out on something business wise by not doing that, I think it's a hard question to ask, because it's just like well, I wouldn't be doing that because that's just not who I am. That's just not who we are. And I think if we tried to fit ourselves into a box that wasn't true to us, I think especially certain types, like especially like IN types and Myers-Briggs, like I think you're an INTP. I think we have this extra deep need to really feel in alignment and like authentic with ourselves and true to who we are, especially once that starts to come online, once the heart and the soul and the spirituality start to come online. There's just this very deep sense of like, I can't bring myself to do something in life that's not congruent with who I am. And I mean, at this point in my life, I think I could actually go work any number of jobs, and if it was for my family's sake, I think I could just adopt an attitude of selfless service. And as long as the job seemed like it was actually providing value to people, I feel like I could do any number of jobs and just kind of see it as like karma yoga, like just a devotional practice, and probably do well at it and enjoy it. Okay. Which I think, yeah, I don't think I would have been able to do that 10 years ago, but I think all the spiritual practice I've done has reached a point where the now moment just like almost always feels interesting to me innately, or I can like just make it interesting by just asking myself certain questions like, who am I, or what is experience, or what is this made of? And so any moment I can inquire in any situation. So anywho, that's a bit of a tangent, but I think, yeah, it's a tricky question to answer. I think one thing that a lot of people don't think about with this question is they just think in terms of the dollar bill bottom line, right? The monetary bottom line. But one thing that Rob's writing really alerted me to, he has this post, The Perils of Niching Down, and he says that he talked to a lot of people who were running niche businesses kind of in his explorations the last few years, because he was the niche guy for a period of time. And he found that many of them felt deeply unhappy with their business. They felt super, like in their life in general, they just felt super boxed in. They felt like they had just created another job for themselves that they didn't really like. They were forced to just continue showing up as this kind of caricature of who they were, just pretending to be this very narrow kind of character that was relevant to this one subset of their life. But they felt dead inside, basically. And I think I'm super curious about the future of the internet in that respect. It's like, and just the future of business, the future of marketing. Yeah. So I guess like, I don't know if I really answered your question. I feel like I may not know the answer. Yes, we may have sacrificed something in terms of finances, but I wouldn't trade like the authenticity of being able to be real and be what I am. And I think actually that the future of the internet and entrepreneurship may be moving more in the direction of letting go of these rigid niches and instead just like building real relationships, which of course has always been important in business, but like building vibrant communities just centered around like pockets of aliveness. And yes, to a certain extent, there will always be niches, like any kind of subculture or community has some kind of niche that they're vibrating around. But it feels like it's potentially becoming looser. And that's what feels currently really exciting for me, is the possibility of like building larger community, just kind of rooted around aliveness and creation and this spark and childlike joy and this type of stuff. So yeah.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting to see which of those become in person, like physical communities. Like, because intentional living communities have been around forever, right? And then you've probably seen like Future Thinkers Smart Village in Canada that they launched, which is like a physical 400-acre property that they purchased, crowdfunded and purchased. And I think people are living there as well, or you can come and go. But it's created kind of like a physical, like-minded place. And then, of course, I think digital communities are going to continue to be an interesting thing to watch. Um, I've seen a lot of digital communities that, start up and then fizzle out. So I do wonder if there's something about it being remote or digital or asynchronous or what have you, that not having that physical aspect at all can kind of come back to bite at a certain point. Or maybe it's just the nature of, digital communities in general, where they pop up when something is alive and then fizzle out when it, fades away. And that's just how it should be. But yeah, it's interesting to watch. But the whole conversation about like meaning and money making is super fascinating. It seems to be a really hot topic right now, especially if you're familiar with like the meta crisis web and like game B and like that whole world. Because a lot of people I've seen they've now found meaning. Like the whole meaning crisis thing kind of happened, like John Vervaeke's work, Awakening from the Meaning Crisis, whenever that YouTube series was posted. I think that was pre-pandemic, so probably like 2018 or 19. And then a lot of people feel like they have found meaning or purpose, and now they're trying to monetize it as like a byproduct, and they're struggling to monetize it. But that's the other thing that I've seen is this paradox of once you start waking up, or in like psychological development terms, go from like conventional to post-conventional, like psychological development, the things you're willing to do for money become more narrow. You start naturally, like these ethical things start and moral things start coming online of like, I'm not willing to do that. Like I'm not willing to put banner ads to sell, junk products on the Sloww website. So I lose out on all of that SEO and traffic of monetizing that, because I am just not willing. Like it's a principle that I'm just not willing to put banner ads on the website. I'm not willing to put, any sponsor in the newsletter, even if they were to pay me thousands and thousands of dollars for one placement or something. So there are all these things that start to come online of what you're not willing to do for money, at the same time of trying to figure out, how do you, I mean, the way that I view it, at least, and have viewed it from the go, is that for me, it's always been finding purpose first, and then profit is a byproduct of like your purpose and action in the world. Or the other way to say it is that it's meaning first, and then money is the byproduct of your meaning and action. So that's kind of the way that, and not everybody, right, is cut out to be or want to be an entrepreneur or a solopreneur or anything like that. Some people might just want to figure out that, they just want to be a really good parent, or they actually want to stay in their career but change roles or jobs within their career to something that's more purposeful. So like they call that like job crafting. So you're still employed, but you're now aligning who you are with a role or career or company, or even a career change, but you're still employed, that is more aligned with who you are now discovering yourself to be. So I think all of those are fascinating and valid. But yeah, I'm seeing and I actually just saw something the other day where we're both technically millennials, but I've seen like Gen Z apparently is prioritizing purpose more so than maybe any other generation. So that's kind of an interesting generational thing, maybe, where you definitely see it with millennials, but maybe each younger generation is going to have even higher priority on purpose first, and then figure out the money side as a byproduct or secondary thing after that. So I think that's great. If it's intrinsic nature first, and then the extrinsic stuff as a byproduct, I think that's a great shift. But I know we're coming up on an hour, I think. So I don't know if you want to maybe
Yeah.
do one more thing or wrap up.
Yeah, I got one more note on one thing you just talked about, and then I want to ask you about your current spiritual practice and like what's kind of most alive, or what's at the cutting edge of your spiritual practice. But one other thing I wanted to note about the future of digital communities is that I think more and more people are really really hungry for what we're doing now, like the face-to-face interaction. And so I think communities that are able to start creating innovative types of online events and really make those like pillars of the community will have will flourish into the future is kind of what I'm seeing, as well as like creating physical events that people can also attend. Like I think that's been massive in how I've managed to continue cultivating my communities in the last years, like by doing retreats and having people come have these incredible kind of activations in person. I just noticed that that takes people's level of like, I mean, we just connect so deeply through those experiences. It just takes their level of like trust and engagement with my work and my life, and it takes them to a whole new level of being kind of true fans of what I do, as well as just genuine friends. And as well, I think like I do a lot of online events. You know, I've been leading two men's circles per week for quite a while now in the men's group that I created. And a really important piece there is that when men join the men's group, they commit that they're going to treat those weekly events like whichever circle they're in, they join one of the circles. So it's a weekly event, but they're going to treat that as a sacred weekly practice. And they're really, they have to let us know if they're going to miss one, and they're really going to prioritize that. And I think that consistent drumbeat of showing up face to face with the group and like bearing their souls in a space of non-judgment and total honesty, and just getting really raw and real, connecting on that level is what has allowed the brotherhood offering to continue to thrive. And so, yeah, that's making me now think more about like, okay, so what is what are the next evolutions of that? And one thing I saw the other day that really inspired me was this new brand called breathewithcannabis.com. And it's like Ryan Sprague and Aaron Abke and Christopher August, who some people may have heard of, kind of three different conscious entrepreneurs kind of teaming up to create online cannabis and breathwork ceremonies, like integrating beats and breathwork and cannabis. And they're getting like 300 people per event. Like they have a pretty sizable reach between them, I think. But I guess they're getting 300 people or so per event coming and breathing together and experiencing like a deep psychedelic journey, utilizing cannabis in actually an intentional and more ceremonial healing kind of way. And they're charging like $55 for one event. So that means they're making like $15,000 per event. Just, and people are, the testimonials coming out of this are really, really powerful, which doesn't surprise me, because I know that cannabis can be utilized as a psychedelic, and that if it is utilized intentionally, especially in combination with breath work and sound in the right way, that it's extremely, extremely powerful. And so that's made me really interested in actually starting to host online cannabis ceremonies myself, to learn about that model doing well, because cannabis has been a great teacher plant in my life, and is one that I still interact with fairly regularly. And so, yeah, I know cannabis very well, and am interested in facilitating stuff like that. So anywho, we'll see where things
Maybe
go. Yeah, go ahead.
maybe all my bad highs when I was younger were just from bad weed. Maybe I just needed to get some good cannabis, and then it'll be a better experience for me.
Could be, or having the right container for it, perhaps, like
True,
stepping
yeah,
in,
yeah.
doing it in a way where you step into a container that someone is very intentionally holding and cultivating, and they take you through a guided process with it. That's very different from just kind of like, oh, I think I'll smoke this and see what happens, kind
Yeah.
of, which is
Yeah, that's
what
a great
most
point
people
too.
do. The
Yeah.
cool thing about that too is like that millions of people already have cannabis in their homes. There's tens of millions of people utilizing cannabis globally, but very few of them are doing so in a conscious way. But since they already have that supply of potentially a healing and awakening and mind altering agent close at hand, if you can just reach people with this message that says, hey, this cannabis that you already have, it can be used in a different way. And if you, you know, step into this sacred container, we can show you how to do that. Like there's a lot of potential there, I think, actually, for a lot more people to kind of enter a deeper awakening journey if they could discover that the cannabis they're already smoking can be utilized more intentionally and combined with breath and sound and healing music and stuff like that to, yeah, produce
Yeah, that's
deeper
super
journeys.
interesting, especially with how legal it's becoming now too. So the access
Mhm.
to it is just,
Yeah,
greater than ever
exactly.
before. And I think all the conscious entrepreneurship stuff, whether, I mean, I think what's interesting is if there's going to be a singular name that everyone latches onto. This seems to happen when something starts bubbling up in the zeitgeist. Everybody uses different names, and then suddenly it becomes named as like a singular thing. Because I've heard like enlightened entrepreneurship, conscious capitalism, spiritual business, intentional business, conscious entrepreneurship. So it'd be interesting to see if it's just like, is conscious entrepreneurship like the thing that everybody kind of latches onto? But even creating an intentional community around that, I think, would be huge. Because it seems like more and more people are becoming interested in that, and I haven't come across anything, I don't think, globally, that people that have been on this journey for a little bit and are dedicated to that and committing themselves to that, have a place to connect with each other. So that could be something interesting too.
Yeah, that's a good idea. So I'm curious then to jump to that other thing I mentioned of asking you about what's most alive in your current spiritual practice. Like I've seen you've gotten quite deep into non-duality. I'm curious what yeah, what's happening there.
Yeah, so I guess there are a couple ways I could tackle this. The first thing that I would say, just to preface everything, is that for me, the spirituality and the living are one and the same thing. So I don't view spirituality as like, this separate thing over here, or like what people view as like church on Sundays or kind of thing, and like that's your spiritual time, and then the rest is just life, or like some like life spiritual balance, like work-life balance kind of thing. I view it all as one and the same thing. And I view the same in terms of like learning. So all of the learning that I feel like I'm doing is in service of the living. So the whole like art of living idea, everything still continues to be fueled by that existential crisis that I had. And now, instead of trying to find, answers to the questions, it's more about like living the questions. So even that ultimate self-inquiry question of who am I, how I would have answered that over the years has changed, right? Because you would initially answer it based on my resume, on my job title, on my house, my clothes, my car, all that like external, extrinsic stuff, and then you start shifting into trying to figure out purpose and the intentional living aspect and the life purpose aspect for me. And so, how you answer that question of who am I ultimately gets you into your psychology of like, I'm, an INTJ Myers-Briggs, I'm an Enneagram 3 or 5, and you start going through all those psychological self-assessments, which I think is a really helpful stage. And I think everybody should go through that anyway, even though all the spirituality stuff, the way that I define spirituality now, as far as it can be defined, is pretty simple. I say it like spirituality is about how to see who you are beyond mind and self in your direct experience. So it's kind of like those few little things, but it's about, to your point, you brought up like immediate direct experience now a couple of times in this conversation. And so like the Douglas Harding's Headless Way has been invaluable for me. I found myself in the Headless Way experience at the dentist recently. So like literally just watching like, these hands come into this void, and just experiencing that. And I find myself in that Headless Way space pretty frequently now. Um, and so, and I've heard from other people, on if you read his book on having no head or something like that, it either immediately clicks with someone or they don't really get it. And that's because it directs you, like the pointing exercises and all this really simple exercises direct you to your immediate experience. And there are some people that are just going to be able to take that pointer and experience it, or people that it's just going to, go over their head, pun intended. Um, so that's been really impactful for me. But I also find myself in just the conscious experience of life more and more often these days, and just fascinated by the sheer and utter mystery of the entire thing. This happens to me almost, I would say, like the Headless Way stuff I find myself in here and there, and then like it happens to me like every night when I go to sleep. Sometimes I find myself in this like space. It's like some people call it like meditation. It's like a bedtime meditation thing where I don't know what it is about, starting to fall asleep, where I find myself in that space. And then the flip side of it, when I wake up in the morning, I just have this experience these days of like, man, I have no idea what happened when I was asleep, and this gets into things outside spirituality, like simulation theories and all the, you mentioned like, moving internationally was getting outside of like your like local matrix of what you had experienced. And so it's like these simple, like the simple things that we take for granted in life and that are unquestioned are now some of the most like miraculous, mysterious, unexplainable, enjoyable things that happen in life. Like all the things that are unconditional, uncaused, independent. It's just like a fascinating thing to just live life now and just watch things unfold as they unfold. And I think part of it for me is the way that I describe awakening is when you are aware of and able to observe or witness your mind, like in action in real time. That's kind of what I describe as awakening, which I would say is different from enlightenment. Enlightenment to me is like when subject and object merge and you have like abiding non-dual awareness, and all of that. But for awakening, like I feel like if you, I don't know if you're a fan of psychological development theories or not, but one of my favorites is Suzanne Cook-Greuter's ego development theory. And she talks about, based on her research, and she's done like, I think upwards of 20,000 of these assessments. So she has a pretty good sample size of data. And then she created the theory out of the data. But basically, her take is that 80% of Western conditioned humans still think they are their mind. And you get it, I'm sure, I get it, because we've gone through it of, yeah, I remember those stages and phases of life where I was my mind, like I was my ideas, the concepts in my mind. And if someone attacked my ideas, they were attacking my identity because they're one and the same. And it's not until you're able to be aware of and observe and witness your mind as like an object, that's when you can question it and reflect upon it and like have a little bit more relative freedom from it because you have some quote unquote like psychological distance from yourself to a certain degree. So that's when a lot of the fun begins, in my opinion, because that's when you really start to wake up to what, like how mysterious everything actually is, because things are uncertain, things are unexplainable, and you get to that kind of like quote unquote beyond mind stuff or beyond self stuff. But yeah, for me, I mean, spirituality for me has always been, like I said, like I grew up raised Catholic and I went to a Jesuit high school and all of that, but it was so uninteresting, growing up that I feel like I almost didn't even get indoctrinated with it because it just went in one ear and out the other because it was so ritualized and all of that. And Catholic growing up did not mean, I had no idea that the word Catholic meant like universal, holistic, like all of these like all encompassing worldview things. That's not what Catholic meant growing up, at least in my experience. It was all about ritual and do this, don't do that, instructions and everything else. So spirituality to me, rediscovering it, or maybe even discovering it for the first time, in my 30s, I had no idea, like no one told me ever that it was about like discovering who you are or inquiring into who you are and starting that journey. That spirituality was like about seeing, that it was about direct experience. Like if science is about the third person, spirituality is about like the first person, like subjective lived experience. Like no one explained any of this stuff to me, and I had to kind of stumble upon it. And I feel like the reason why I dabble in a multitude of different teachers and denominations, like I just went through a direct path, like non-duality kick. I just also went through a Advaita Vedanta kick, like going through that lineage. But part of it is, and reading, right, is just a psychological thing because that's happening on the level of your mind. Even reading a spiritual book is just a psychological thing. But I almost consider myself like a spiritual synthesizer in terms of like trying to understand the common denominator or essence of all the pointers. So if someone uses the word mind over here, but they're referring to the same thing that this person over here is talking about when they say consciousness, or this person over here says self, but this person over here uses capital S self or uppercase M mind or whatever it may be, like that's where you have to come to terms and create common ground between all of these different writers and different geographic locations between East and West, different generations of people dating back, hundreds or thousands of years to today. And so a lot of what I feel like I'm doing is from the psychological aspect, I'm trying to create a good map of pointers. And that's where the spiritual synthesizing kind of comes into play, or being a spiritual translator. just trying to understand like what are they talking about, like what are they pointing to, and are they pointing to the same thing that this person's talking about over here or trying to point to. And so it's kind of on you, the reader, to figure that out, and then trying to, live the pointers. So that's where, to me, spirituality, it just becomes really simple, and it's just about living. Like the practice field and the spiritual practice field and the playing field are one and the same thing. Like I'm constantly testing things out against my own live experience and seeing how things go, seeing how life unfolds and plays out. And so, yeah, I would say practice wise, it's really just about the living for me.
Mm, beautiful. Thanks for sharing
But yeah,
that.
I don't know if you still have time to give your answer, but
Sure. Yeah. One thing I was going to ask, and then I can give my answer, was if are there any pithy pointers or mantras that you find yourself saying to yourself fairly often to direct your attention toward the immediate now moment or toward what is beyond the mind?
hmm, that's a good question. I'm gonna have to do some thinking about that to see if I can come
Mm,
up with like it's almost like if you are able to listen to life in any given moment, then it'll bubble up the right pointer in that moment,
mm.
and like that, because every context and circumstance and moment is different. I don't know if I have any that I just have go-tos,
Like
but yeah.
when the headlessness thing comes online, is that just spontaneous, or do you first have kind of like say to yourself, "Oh yeah, remember you don't have a head," or something like that, or does it just happen spontaneously?
I think it's mostly spontaneous.
Mm,
Yeah, I think it's mostly spontaneous at this point, and maybe it always has been. But I guess that's
mm,
kind of how thought works in general, right? It's just spontaneous. Like if we
mm.
knew what we were going to think next, we could have control over our thoughts. So, um,
Yeah.
yeah, but it's almost like I guess the impetus maybe is in any given moment, especially moments that are considered like annoying or frustrating or something that's starting to like rattle you off like your just baseline, normal default mode. That can be a sign for me to pause for a moment and listen to what's going on, to like just
Mm,
listen to life and try to pay attention and be aware of what life is telling me in that moment.
mm,
And in almost every moment, for instance, I had one recently where I was annoyed because I had to take the dogs out like 5 times in an hour and it was taking me away from like the thing I was working on. And so I paused for a moment and I was like, why am I annoyed with this? And I'm like, I'm annoyed with this because I feel like I'm somebody and these dogs are taking away from this somebody's work and whatever else. And so then you start asking all the additional questions. It's like the 5 whys, like the root cause analysis of asking a question, then asking a question to the answer to that question. And you keep going deeper until every question
mm,
ultimately is unanswerable once you go deep enough. But it's almost using like those trigger moments as your opportunity for inquiry and your opportunity for listening to just what life is trying to tell you in that moment. But yeah.
mm. Yeah, beautiful. I love doing that too, inquiring in those moments. And for me, as far as like the cutting edge of my practice, I would say that mantras are actually really important for me. There's something about words. I mean, I'm a very word-based person. So very often what triggers me, what like activates or initiates a deep process of inquiry or meditation in day-to-day life is that I'll kind of realize that I want to go there or that I've kind of forgotten the now. And then I'll just say any number of things to myself. So for me, I have a lot of pointers, a lot of mantras that I'll use. Recently, like some of my favorite ones are "This is it." Like I actually have considered getting a tattoo that just says "This is it" because I really
Mm,
like that one. She's like, "This is it right now. This is what you're looking for right now. It's literally right here. So what is it? You know." Similarly, like "This is the finish line." I really like that one because
mm,
it like short circuits our culture's entire operating system basically, which always puts the finish
yeah.
line somewhere far off into the future, and it's like
Right. Yeah. That
life
short
is
circuits the becoming and the idea of progress and all those things. Yeah. Yeah. That's a good one.
yeah, this is the finish line. I also like "I don't need anything from anything," or "I don't want anything from anything." If you just kind of start saying that and let yourself feel like "I don't need anything from anything," it just kind of subdues all your typical human cravings and desires, and you can just come into this like spaciousness of like, oh yeah, I don't need anything from anything in this moment, so there's nothing to do but just allow the moment to be and look at the moment. And um there was another one I was going to mention. Yeah, there's many of them. Another one for a long time was indefinable actuality. Indefinable actuality, just like, because that's, I think that's the one of the best portals for me. Another way that I say it to myself is stop concretizing.
Yeah, I
And
saw you
that's
mention that one recently. Yeah.
okay, nice. Yeah. And a lot of this is influenced by Peter Brown, actually. Peter Brown's, so I would say if people want to understand the cutting edge of my practice, I think Peter Brown might be the best person to read. Peter Brown or Jesus Christ, and exploring the Christian mystical tradition. Because I would say my current cutting edge is really a synthesis of Christian mysticism and Peter Brown's yoga of radiant presence, and also to a lesser extent Advaita Vedanta and like some more like medicine path type stuff. But I feel, yeah, for me, I've had this unexpected full circle revolution back to Christianity. I was also raised Catholic, but I connect to it in a completely different way now. And primarily, it's just like a very heart centered thing where I think because it's in my lineage, my ancestry, and I was raised with it, when I listen to those Christian church songs from my youth, they that I used to sing in church, and I was even a cantor in church, they hit me in the heart like
Mm.
very few other songs do. And so that heart-based practice is really crucial for me. And then for me, Peter Brown is just the ultimate ninja of pointers. Like this guy, if you want to talk about like pithy pointers, this guy just has an absolute treasure trove of the greatest pointers known to man. Like the book, one of his students compiled a book, The Astonishing Nature of Experience. And that book is just literally like thousands, probably thousands of direct pointers, just pointing at unexpected, fresh ways to engage non-conceptually with this moment now, and kind of just like just suddenly snap out of your habitual reference points and come into the freshness of, oh, this is all instantaneously appearing here for from nowhere, and I don't know what this is. And that's really like, that's what I've found. Peter just says basically just notice that and then just hang out there and just do that, fairly often, like, or as often as you feel inclined to do it. Basically, there's really no rules, but just notice what experience is. Notice that you don't know what it is. And then when you're in that place where you're out of your normal story and you're just kind of in no man's land, you're just floating, you're just kind of free falling, then just hang out there and drink it in and sensitively just kind of let it show you what it is. He will often say, let it show you what it is, from that space of not knowing what it is and not having a story about it. And that to me has been very fruitful. So yeah, I can
Nice.
definitely
Yeah, based
recommend
on your
it.
recommendation, I added that book and Peter Brown's is it Dirty Enlightenment? Maybe a
Mm-hmm.
third
Yeah.
one. I can't remember that I've got on my reading list. So those are to come for me. But we'll have to have a round two for all the Christian mysticism stuff because I'm finding myself in that too. I've recently explored Marshall Davis, who does a lot of the Christian non-duality stuff. I read two or three of his books. They're pretty short, quick reads.
Okay.
Um, like one of them is like the non-dual gospel of Jesus. And then he's got some other ones. And then Brother Lawrence, The Practice of the Presence of God, I read. But I read Marshall Davis's version and translation of it. There are a bunch, right? Gospel of Thomas. Um, The Cloud of Unknowing. Man, I've got probably 10 maybe on my reading list that seem to be go-tos. So I'm interested in rediscovering it too because I can't remember who said this, but I came across someone who was like, if you have an aversion to the religion or spirituality that you were raised with, then you're you're still like suppressing or repressing something from like your childhood. You're like you have to get beyond that essentially. So you have to face that face to face, figure out what it is, and um, come to terms with it and everything else. And I thought that was interesting because um, this reminds me of a quote from Stephen Mitchell's Tao Te Ching translation, where he has something that's like, aversion is the flip side of greed. So it's like the same desire from a different direction, which is kind of fascinating because it's like, people think about all the things related to greed all the time, but thinking about aversion as the same thing, just coming from a different direction is fascinating because everybody has their aversions to things too. And I never really thought about like an aversion to the religion or spirituality that I grew up with. So rediscovering like what Catholicism is supposed to mean, interpreting it through like a new mind that I have now, interpreting it from more of a non-dual perspective, like all of that I think is super fascinating and something that I wouldn't have guessed I would be doing, years ago. But yeah, we'll have to have a round two for that for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. I'd love to do a round two and dive deeper into all this stuff. Yeah, I love talking about non-duality, ironically, since it's like you can't really talk about it, but you can just talk around it endlessly and point at it,
Yeah.
and it's fun to do so. So yeah.
Yeah. One thing I'll just, I guess, wrap up with this, but one thing that I found interesting that was an aha moment for me. I'm sure you have these too, where it's like an epiphany or aha moment where like you almost get goosebumps or like sit back in your chair because something that you already knew intuitively, it gets articulated in a way that you hadn't heard before. So to your point about mantras and how powerful words can be, just being able to articulate something to yourself that you already felt or had a felt sense or intuition about is super powerful. But I just read some speech from Swami Vivekananda, who's in the Advaita Vedanta lineage, and he gave this speech over 100 years ago, and he basically nailed what I was trying to put into words. Where he said, the whole thing that happens is in the Western world, people are raised to think that they are a body and a mind first, and then like a soul or spirit second, or like your soul or spirit is contained within your body or mind. Whereas in the East, it's the complete flip, where the body and mind appear in the soul or spirit. And so you are aware of your body and mind versus in the West, you are your body and mind. And that completely turns everything upside down in terms of, the socialization and conditioning that we got here in the West, in the Midwest specifically, versus what someone in the East may just be raised with to know from the get-go. So that was just an interesting recent thing that I came across that was kind of had a good explainable factor to it. I felt like.
Yeah. Yeah. Thanks for sharing that. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, shall we wrap it up here, my friend?
Yeah, sounds good.
All right,
Go
cool.
enjoy that date.
Yeah. Let me just stop the recording here. We can talk for a moment afterwards. That sounds good to you. Yeah.
Sounds good.
Thank you.